Private Darnell Washington stepped off the transport shuttle onto the red dusty ground of Mars Colony 7. His legs felt weak after the 3-month journey from Earth. The artificial gravity on the shuttle was never quite the same as natural gravity. Around him, 49 other recruits stumbled forward, forming lines as instructed by the barking voices of officers. "Move it, Earthlings." "This isn't a vacation resort," shouted a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver-gray haircut, so short it was almost invisible. The name tag on his perfectly pressed uniform read, "SGT Pierce." Darnell lined up with the others, standing straight with his shoulders back. The heavy Martian sky loomed overhead, the dome of the colony just visible as a faint shimmer against the dusty orange atmosphere. He had trained for this moment for months, but still his heart pounded in his chest. Sergeant Maxwell Pierce walked slowly down the line of new recruits. His eyes were cold blue, and his face looked like it was carved from stone. He stopped in front of each recruit, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just staring. When he reached Darnell, he stopped longer than he had for anyone else. "Name and origin, recruit," Pierce said, his voice hard. "Private Darnell Washington, sir." "Chicago, North American Zone, Earth, sir," Darnell replied, keeping his eyes forward. Pierce circled him slowly. "An Earthling from Chicago. Well, isn't that special?" His voice dripped with dislike. "Tell me, Washington, you think you have what it takes to be part of the Interplanetary Defense Force?" "Yes, sir," Darnell answered firmly. Pierce leaned in closer. "I've seen 100 recruits like you come through here. Most wash out within the first month. Mars isn't for everyone, especially not soft Earthborn who grew up in cushy dome cities." Darnell said nothing, keeping his face neutral even as anger flickered inside him. This wasn't his first encounter with prejudice, but he hadn't expected it here. Not in 2157. Not in the supposedly elite and forward-thinking Interplanetary Defense Force. "Your gear looks sloppy, Washington," Pierce said, though Darnell's uniform and bag were arranged exactly like everyone else's. "Drop and give me 30 push-ups, now." Without hesitation, Darnell dropped to the ground and began doing push-ups in the heavy Martian gravity. Though Mars had less gravity than Earth, their training suits were weighted to simulate Earth conditions, making the exercise challenging. "The rest of you follow Lieutenant Reyes to your barracks," Pierce ordered. "Washington will catch up when he learns how to present himself properly." A tall woman with dark hair pulled into a tight bun stepped forward. "Recruits this way," she said, her voice firm but not unkind. As she led the group away, she glanced back at Darnell with an unreadable expression. After completing his push-ups, Darnell stood at attention again. His face showed no strain, no sign of the effort he had just exerted. Pierce frowned. "Your gear needs inspection, follow me." For the next hour, Pierce made Darnell unpack and repack his bags 3 times, finding fault with his folding technique, the arrangement of his items, and even the way his name was printed on his belongings. All the while, the other recruits were getting settled and oriented to their new home. When Darnell finally reached the barracks, he found that the only bunk left was the one nearest the washroom door, known to be the worst spot because of the noise and lack of privacy. He set his things down without complaint. "Hey," said a voice. A young man with sandy blonde hair and freckles held out his hand from the neighboring bunk. "I'm Zach Miller. That was rough luck with Pierce." Darnell shook his hand. "Darnell Washington. Is he always like that?" A young woman with short black hair leaned over from across the narrow walkway. "Pierce? Yeah, he's a nightmare, but he seemed to really have it out for you. I'm Lisa Gomez, by the way." "Nice to meet you both," Darnell said. Lisa lowered her voice. "Look, you should know. Pierce has a reputation. He's especially hard on recruits who aren't white. The last training group had a guy from Nigeria who quit after 2 weeks because of him." Darnell nodded slowly. "Thanks for the heads up. We've got orientation in 10 minutes, Zach said, checking his wrist display. "Better hurry." The 3 of them hurried to the main hall, where Lieutenant Olivia Reyes was already addressing the group. She was reviewing the training schedule and colony rules. "You will train for 6 months, she was saying as they slipped into the back row. "This training will test you physically, mentally, and emotionally. Mars Colony 7 is one of our most important outposts, and only the best. Serve here." After orientation, the recruits were taken to the mess hall. As they ate, Darnell noticed Sergeant Pierce watching him from across the room. The sergeant's gaze was calculating, cold. The next morning, training began at 0500 hours. The recruits were taken to the exercise yard, still dark under the Martian pre-dawn sky. Sergeant Pierce stood before them, his face lit from below by a glowing tablet. "Today we begin finding out who among you has what it takes," he said. "And who doesn't?" His eyes lingered on Darnell. The first exercise was a 5-mile run in their weighted suits. Despite the unfamiliar terrain and the weight, Darnell kept pace at the front of the group. Years of running track in high school and college had prepared him well. "Washington," Pierce called as Darnell passed the finish line first. "Reset your suit. It must be malfunctioning." "Sir?" Darnell asked, breathing hard but steady. "Your suit weight is clearly not calibrated correctly. Reset it and run the course again." Darnell checked his suit settings. They were correct, set to the standard training weight. But he knew better than to argue. "Yes, sir." As the other recruits moved on to the next exercise, Darnell ran the 5 miles again. This time, Pierce made him carry an extra pack. Despite this, Darnell finished strong, his face showing determination but not defeat. Throughout the day, Pierce continued to single Darnell out. Extra repetitions of exercises, incorrectly performed tasks that needed to be redone, equipment that needed to be double-checked. By evening, when the other recruits were exhausted from their first day, Darnell was pushed well beyond what anyone else had endured. In the shower that night, Zach whispered to him, "How are you still standing, man? Pierce ran you ragged today." Darnell just smiled. "I've dealt with worse." Meanwhile, in her office, Lieutenant Reyes was reviewing the day's training data. She frowned at the screen, then pulled up Darnell's file. His physical scores were off the charts, far beyond what was expected of a new recruit. His reflexes especially were nearly superhuman. She leaned back in her chair, thinking. There was something unusual about Private Washington. His eyes held a confidence that most new recruits lacked. The way he handled Pierce's targeting was not the response of someone experiencing military pressure for the first time. Lieutenant Reyes closed the file and made a note to watch Private Washington more closely. There was more to him than met the eye, and she intended to find out what it was. 3 weeks passed at Mars Colony 7. The red dust storms battered the dome walls and the recruits grew tougher every day. Most of them did anyway. 4 had already quit, unable to handle the harsh training and even harsher environment. Darnell, Washington stood in the middle of the training yard, sweat dripping down his face. Around him, other recruits practiced with the new plasma rifles, aiming at moving targets. Each hit caused a small explosion of light and a satisfying beep from the scoring system. "Washington!" Sergeant Pierce's voice cut through the noise. "Your rifle is malfunctioning. Take this one instead." Pierce handed Darnell an older model rifle. Even at a glance, Darnell could see the targeting system was off, the power pack half drained. "Yes, sir," he said, accepting the weapon without complaint. Lisa Gomez caught his eye from the next station over. She had noticed the switch, too. She frowned and shook her head slightly. Darnell stepped up to the firing line. The targets began to move, robots zipping back and forth across the range at various speeds. With the faulty weapon, most recruits would have struggled to hit even one. Darnell took a deep breath, adjusted his stance slightly, and began to fire. Beep, beep, beep. 3 hits in a row. From the corner of his eye, Darnell could see Pierce's frown deepen. The sergeant hadn't expected this outcome. "Beginner's luck," Pierce muttered. Darnell continued until he had hit all 10 targets, some multiple times. His score flashed on the board, 98-100, the highest of the day, even with the sabotaged equipment. Later that afternoon, the recruits gathered for their tactical training session. Lieutenant Reyes stood at the front of the room, her tablet displaying a complex battle scenario. "Today we'll be running a simulated space combat exercise," she announced. "You'll be divided into 2 teams. Blue team will defend the colony. Red team will attack. Your objective is to either destroy the enemy ships or protect the colony for 10 minutes, depending on your team. The recruits were split into teams, and Darnell found himself on the blue team with Zach and several others. Pierce, personally, assigned Darnell to the most difficult position, rear gunner, responsible for tracking multiple threats at once. "Good luck, Washington," Pierce said with a smirk. "Most experienced soldiers struggle with that position." The simulation began. The recruits sat at control panels that mimicked actual spacecraft systems. The screens around them displayed the star-filled blackness of space with red dots approaching fast. Darnell's fingers flew over the controls. He tracked incoming missiles, shot them down, and called out warnings to his teammates with a calm, authoritative voice that surprised even him. It was as if some buried part of his brain had awakened. The simulation ended with a blue team victory. Darnell's performance had been flawless, beyond what should have been possible for a new recruit. Pierce stared at the results on his tablet, his face turning nearly as red as the Martian landscape outside. "Washington, stay behind," he ordered as the others filed out. When they were alone, Pierce circled Darnell like a predator. "You're cheating somehow," he accused. "Nobody picks up rear gunner controls that quickly." "No, sir, I'm not cheating." Darnell responded evenly. "Then explain how an Earthling with no prior space combat experience managed to achieve scores that veteran soldiers would envy." "I played a lot of video games, sir," Darnell said, his face serious. Pierce's eye twitched with anger. "You think this is funny, Washington? This is the defense of humanity we're training for, not some game." "No, sir, I don't think it's funny. You're on bathroom cleaning duty for the next week," Pierce snapped. "And I'm launching an official investigation into your scores. When I find out how you're cheating, you'll be on the first transport back to Earth." Later that night, in the barracks, Lisa and Zach found Darnell scrubbing the showers with a small brush. "This is ridiculous," Lisa said, leaning against the doorway. "Everyone knows you're not cheating. Pierce is just mad that his plan to make you fail backfired." Darnell shrugged. "It's just cleaning. I've done worse." Zach looked at him curiously. "You know, you never talk about your life before enlisting. What did you do on Earth?" For a moment, something guarded crossed Darnell's face. "Nothing special. Office work, mostly." Lisa raised an eyebrow. "Office work. You have the reflexes of a fighter pilot and the calm of a veteran. That doesn't come from pushing papers." Darnell changed the subject. "How are you guys feeling about tomorrow's EVA exercise?" The extravehicular activity exercise was scheduled for the next day. It would be their first time outside the colony dome in full spacesuits performing maintenance tasks on the colony's exterior. "Nervous," Zach admitted. "I've never been in a real space environment before." "You'll be fine," Darnell said confidently. "Just remember your training and stay calm." The next morning, the recruits suited up for the EVA exercise. The airlock chamber was crowded with 20 people in bulky spacesuits, all connected to safety lines. Lieutenant Reyes checked each recruit's equipment personally. When she reached Darnell, she paused, examining his oxygen readout. "Your levels seem a bit low, Private Washington. Let me adjust that for you." As she leaned in to fix his tank, she whispered, "Be careful out there. Your suit was tampered with. I fixed it, but keep an eye on your readings." Darnell met her eyes through their helmet visors. A silent understanding passed between them. The outer airlock doors opened, and the Martian landscape stretched before them in all its barren glory. Red dust swirled in the thin atmosphere, and the distant sun looked smaller than it did from Earth. The recruits moved in pairs, practicing repair procedures on a test section of the colony's outer wall. Darnell was paired with a quiet recruit named Frank Daniels, who seemed grateful to be working with the class star. They were halfway through their assigned task when Darnell's oxygen alarm beeped softly in his helmet. Despite Lieutenant Reyes's fix, something was still wrong. His oxygen was depleting faster than it should. At the same moment, Frank's voice came through the radio, panicked. "My suit's losing pressure. There's a tear somewhere." Darnell looked over and saw the problem immediately. A small tear had formed near Frank's shoulder joint, barely visible but deadly in the Martian atmosphere. Without hesitation, Darnell moved to Frank, pulling a patch kit from his utility belt. "Stay still," he instructed, his voice calm and commanding. "I'm going to seal it." With precise movements that spoke of practice far beyond his supposed experience, Darnell applied the emergency patch. Meanwhile, his own oxygen levels continued to drop. Sergeant Pierce watched from the colony's observation window, his eyes narrowed. Washington's actions were too smooth, too practiced for a new recruit. Something was definitely not right about Private Darnell Washington. In her office, Lieutenant Reyes was reviewing security footage that showed Pierce entering the equipment room early that morning, before the EVA exercise. She frowned deeply, then tapped a command into her tablet. A moment later, Commander Richard Clark's face appeared on her screen. "Lieutenant, what can I do for you?" the commander asked. "Sir, I think we need to talk about Sergeant Pierce and Private Washington," she said. "There's something you should see." Commander Richard Clark sat at his desk, a deep frown on his weathered face. In front of him, Lieutenant Reyes stood at attention, her tablet displaying the security footage she had discovered. "You're certain about this?" Clark asked, his voice grave. "Yes, sir. The footage clearly shows Sergeant Pierce tampering with Private Washington's oxygen supply before the EVA exercise. If I hadn't noticed and partially fixed it, Washington could have died out there." Clark rubbed his temple. "And you say this isn't the first incident?" "No, sir. Pierce has been targeting Washington since day one. Faulty equipment, extra drills, impossible tasks. Despite all this, Washington has excelled beyond any recruit I've ever seen." The commander nodded slowly. "I've noticed his scores. They're unusual for a new recruit." He tapped a few commands into his computer. "I've initiated a background check on Washington. In the meantime, keep a close eye on both him and Pierce. Don't confront Pierce yet. I want to understand the full situation first." "Yes, sir," Reyes replied. As she turned to leave, an alarm blared through the colony. Clark's communication panel lit up. "Commander, we've received an emergency distress call from Copernicus Research Station. They've been hit by a solar flare, their shields are down, and they're losing life support." "How many people?" Clark asked, immediately alert. 15 scientists, sir. Their backup systems are failing and temperatures are dropping fast. The main rescue team is 2 days out on a mission to Phobos." Clark's decision was immediate. "Assemble an emergency response unit, available instructors and top-performing trainees. We can reach Copernicus in 3 hours if we leave now." 30 minutes later, 8 people gathered at the shuttle bay. Sergeant Pierce and Lieutenant Reyes stood with 6 recruits, including Darnell, Lisa, and Zach. "This is not a drill," Commander Clark told them. "Copernicus Station is in serious trouble. You were selected based on your training scores and specific skills. Lieutenant Reyes will command the mission, Sergeant Pierce will pilot. Your job is to stabilize the station and evacuate the scientists if necessary." Pierce's eyes narrowed when he saw Darnell among the selected recruits. "Sir, with all due respect, we should take more experienced personnel, not trainees who've barely been here a month." "These recruits have the highest scores in their class, Sergeant," Clark replied firmly. "And we don't have time to wait for more experienced teams to return from their missions. You leave in 10 minutes. The shuttle lifted off from Mars Colony 7, speeding toward the southern polar region where Copernicus Station was located. Inside, the team checked their emergency equipment. "Remember your training," Lieutenant Reyes said. "This is a real situation with lives at stake. Follow orders, stay calm, and work together." Darnell nodded, his face serious but composed. Next to him, Zach looked nervous, his hands fidgeting with his oxygen meter. "It's going to be okay," Darnell told him quietly. "Just focus on one task at a time." Pierce, overhearing from the pilot's seat, shot Darnell an irritated look. "Worry about yourself, Washington. This isn't a training exercise where you can cheat your way through." Suddenly, the shuttle shuddered violently. Warning lights flashed across the control panel. "What's happening?" Reyes asked, moving to the front. "We're hitting unexpected turbulence in the atmosphere," Pierce replied, his hands gripping the controls tightly. "There must be a dust storm between us and the station." The shuttle rocked again, harder this time. Equipment tumbled from storage compartments. A support beam groaned ominously. "Can you navigate around it?" Reyes asked. I'm trying, Pierce said, but his voice had changed. There was a note of panic in it now. The shuttle lurched again, nearly, turning sideways. Darnell unbuckled his safety harness and moved forward. Permission to assist, Lieutenant? Reyes looked at Pierce, whose hands were now shaking on the controls. Granted. Darnell slipped into the co-pilot seat. Sergeant, we need to drop altitude and approach from below the storm. The winds will be less severe closer to the surface. Pierce stared at him. That's a specialized pilot maneuver. How would you know that? Instead of answering, Darnell took the secondary controls. With your permission, sir? Pierce hesitated, then nodded. The shuttle was now spinning dangerously. Darnell's hands moved across the controls with practiced ease. He adjusted thrusters, changed their angle of descent, and engaged stabilizers in a sequence that only an experienced pilot would know. Gradually, the shuttle stopped spinning and began a controlled descent. Now we'll circle around and approach Copernicus from the east, Darnell explained, as if he'd done this 100 times before. The station's natural shield wall will give some protection from the winds. Pierce stared at him, suspicion and confusion written across his face. But there was no time to question Washington's unexpected skills. The lives of 15 scientists were at stake. They landed at Copernicus Station 20 minutes later, the shuttle settling onto the pad with barely a bump despite the howling winds outside. Perfect landing, Reyes commented, giving Darnell a knowing look. The team suited up and entered the station through the emergency airlock. Inside, they found the situation dire. The temperature was dropping rapidly and oxygen levels were critically low. The scientists huddled in the central lab, wearing thermal emergency blankets. Thank goodness you're here, a woman in a lab coat said, her teeth chattering with cold. Our main power system is fried from the solar flare. The backup generators are running at 10% and failing. Lieutenant Reyes divided the team into groups. Pierce, take Washington and check the main power couplings on level 3. See if we can restore partial power. Gomez and Miller, help me set up the emergency life support systems. The rest of you, prepare the scientists for possible evacuation. Pierce and Darnell made their way to level 3. The corridors were dark, lit only by emergency lights that cast eerie red shadows. How did you know how to pilot like that? Pierce demanded as they walked. That wasn't beginner's luck. We should focus on the mission, sir, Darnell replied evenly. They reached the power coupling room. As Darnell examined the fried systems, the station shuddered. A loud cracking sound came from above, and before either man could react, part of the ceiling collapsed. Pierce shoved Darnell aside but wasn't fast enough to save himself. A heavy metal beam pinned him to the floor, crushing his right leg. Worse, the beam had severed his suit's oxygen line. Air hissed out rapidly. Pierce! Darnell knelt beside him, quickly assessing the damage. The sergeant's face was contorted with pain, and his oxygen meter was dropping fast. Without hesitation, Darnell connected his own secondary oxygen supply to Pierce's suit. This will give you enough air while I get this beam off you. Why? Why would you help me? Pierce gasped, genuine confusion in his eyes. After everything I've done? Because that's what soldiers do, Darnell replied simply. Then, with strength that seemed impossible for his frame, he began to lift the heavy metal beam. With a final heave, Darnell lifted the metal beam enough for Pierce to drag himself free. The sergeant's leg was badly injured, blood seeping through his torn suit, but he was alive. We need to seal that tear in your suit, Darnell said, pulling out his repair kit. His movements were quick and precise as he applied the emergency patch. Pierce watched him work, his expression a mix of pain and confusion. Where did you learn to do that? That's not the standard procedure we teach recruits. Later, Darnell replied, helping Pierce to his feet. Can you walk? Barely. Pierce winced as he put weight on his injured leg. But I can make it with help. Darnell supported Pierce as they made their way back toward the central lab. The station creaked and groaned around them, more pieces of ceiling threatening to fall. Washington, Pierce said after they had gone a short way, I've been a real piece of work to you. Why didn't you just leave me back there? Nobody would have blamed you. Darnell gave him a level look. That's not who I am, sir. They reached the central lab to find most of the scientists already evacuated to the shuttle. Lieutenant Reyes rushed over when she saw Pierce's condition. What happened? She asked, examining his leg. Ceiling collapse, Darnell explained. We need to get him to the shuttle now. His leg needs medical attention and I had to share my oxygen with him. My supply's running low. Reyes nodded. The station's structure is becoming unstable. We've nearly finished the evacuation. Did you check the power couplings? No time, Darnell said. But I have an idea. The station's backup generator is failing because of overload. If we shut down all non-essential systems and reroute power, we might be able to stabilize life support long enough to get everyone out. She stared at him again. That's advanced engineering knowledge. Reyes gave Darnell a curious look but nodded. Do it. I'll help the last scientist to the shuttle. While Reyes escorted Pierce and the remaining scientists, Darnell hurried to the station's control room. His fingers flew over the keyboards, accessing systems and rerouting power in ways no ordinary recruit should know how to do. By the time he returned to the shuttle, everyone else was aboard and ready for departure. The moment Darnell sealed the airlock behind him, Lieutenant Reyes gave the order to lift off. The journey back to Mars Colony 7 was tense but uneventful. Pierce sat in medical isolation, his leg treated and bandaged by one of the scientists with medical training. He watched Darnell from across the shuttle, his eyes narrowed in thought. When they landed back at the colony, medical teams rushed in to take care of Pierce and check the scientists. Commander Clark was waiting for them, his face stern but relieved. Good work, team, he said. Thanks to your quick response, all 15 scientists were rescued with only minor injuries. He turned to Darnell. Private Washington, I'd like to see you in my office now. Darnell nodded, his face betraying nothing. Lisa and Zach exchanged worried glances, thinking their friend was in trouble. In the commander's office, Darnell stood, at attention before Clark's desk. Lieutenant Reyes was there too, standing off to the side. Clark studied Darnell for a long moment, then slid a folder across his desk. Do you know what this is, Washington? Darnell glanced at the folder, but didn't touch it. I believe it's my real file, sir. That's right, Clark said. Your real file. Not the fake one created for your undercover assignment. Would you care to explain to Lieutenant Reyes why one of the most decorated special operations officers in the Interplanetary Defense Force is pretending to be a raw recruit in her training program? Reyes's eyes widened in shock. Sir? Darnell finally relaxed his stance. When he spoke, his voice had changed subtly. It carried the unmistakable tone of command. I apologize for the deception, Lieutenant. It was necessary for my mission. And what mission was that, Colonel Washington? Clark asked, emphasizing the rank. 3 years ago, I was sent undercover to infiltrate a terrorist group in the Jovian colonies, Darnell explained. After completing that mission, I received reports of systematic discrimination in our training programs, reports that were being dismissed by official investigations because the victims were afraid to speak up. He turned to Reyes. The brass needed someone on the inside, someone who could experience the discrimination firsthand and document it properly, I volunteered. So all this time, Reyes began. I've been gathering evidence, Darnell confirmed, not just against Sergeant Pierce, but about the entire training system, the good and the bad. Clark opened the folder to reveal Darnell's true record. Colonel Darnell Washington, 15 years of distinguished service, multiple commendations for bravery, expert ratings in piloting, combat, and tactical operations. Lieutenant Reyes, I'm sorry for keeping you in the dark, Clark said. This operation was classified at the highest levels. Only 3 people in the entire force knew about it. Reyes looked at Darnell with new eyes. So when Pierce was sabotaging your equipment, I was letting him dig his own grave, Darnell said, though I admit the oxygen tank tampering was more dangerous than I expected. Clark's communication panel beeped. Sir, Sergeant Pierce is out of medical and requesting to see you. He says it's urgent. Send him in, Clark ordered. Pierce limped into the office a moment later, leaning on a crutch. He stopped short when he saw Darnell. Sergeant Pierce, Clark said, his voice cold. Just the man we were discussing. Pierce's eyes moved from Clark to Reyes, then settled on Darnell. Sir, I need to report Private Washington. There's something not right about him. His skills are far beyond recruit level. During the rescue mission, he displayed knowledge of advanced piloting techniques, emergency procedures, and systems engineering that no recruit should have. I believe he may have falsified his enlistment records. A heavy silence fell over the room. Then, to Pierce's confusion, Commander Clark began to laugh. You're absolutely right, Sergeant, Clark said. Private Washington has indeed been hiding his true identity. He gestured to Darnell. Allow me to introduce Colonel Darnell Washington, Special Operations. The blood drained from Pierce's face. See, Colonel? Darnell nodded. Hello, Sergeant. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about your training methods. Pierce swayed on his crutch, looking as if he might faint. Sir, I can explain. Save it. Clark cut him off. We have footage of you tampering with the Colonel's equipment. We have documentation of your systematic discrimination against recruits of color. The evidence is overwhelming. And that's before we get to today's rescue mission, Reyes added, where your actions, or rather your freezing under pressure, could have cost lives. Pierce's face crumpled. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything right now, Darnell told him. You've had your chance to speak through your actions. Now it's time to listen. He stepped forward, meeting Pierce's gaze directly. For the past month, you've targeted me because of the color of my skin. You've pushed me harder, criticized me more, and even endangered my life. All because you believed I didn't belong here. Pierce couldn't hold Darnell's gaze. He looked at the floor. What happens now? Court-martial? That would be the standard procedure, Clark confirmed. Discrimination, endangering the lives of personnel, dereliction of duty during an emergency. The charges are serious. Darnell was quiet, for a moment thinking. Then he turned to Clark. Sir, if I may make a suggestion? Commander Clark looked at Darnell with interest. What do you have in mind, Colonel? Darnell turned to face Pierce, who was still pale with shock. Sergeant Pierce has 15 years of service. His record before this assignment shows he's a skilled trainer. His technical scores are excellent. It would be a waste to simply throw that away. What are you suggesting? Reyes asked, surprise evident in her voice. Rehabilitation rather than punishment, Darnell said. A temporary reassignment to the Diversity and Inclusion Division on Earth. 6 months working with recruits from all backgrounds. A chance to confront his biases and actually grow from this experience. Pierce blinked in confusion. You're not pressing charges. I didn't say that, Darnell replied. The choice is this. Accept the reassignment and complete a comprehensive anti-discrimination program, or face court-martial and likely dishonorable discharge. Clark considered this. It's an unusual recommendation, Colonel. Most people in your position would want the maximum punishment. I'm not interested in revenge, sir. I'm interested in making our force better. If Pierce can learn from this and change his behavior, he could become a valuable asset in helping others overcome similar biases. Pierce stared at Darnell, genuinely baffled. Why would you give me a second chance after everything I did? Because on that station, when you thought we might die, you pushed me out of the way of that falling beam, Darnell said simply. You risked your life to save mine, even though you've treated me terribly for weeks. That tells me there's something worth saving in you, Sergeant. The room fell silent. After a long moment, Clark nodded. Very well. Sergeant Pierce, you have until tomorrow morning to decide. Dismissed. Pierce saluted shakily and limped out of the office. Once he was gone, Reyes turned to Darnell. Do you really think he can change? I've seen it happen before, Darnell said. Sometimes people just need to be confronted with their own prejudices in a way they can't ignore. Clark stood up. Well, Colonel Washington, your undercover mission is officially over. What's next for you? I need to compile my full report on the training program, Darnell replied. There's a lot that's working well here, but also areas that need improvement. After that, I'm due for reassignment. The next morning, Darnell met with Lisa and Zach in the mess hall. Both still looked stunned by the revelation of his true identity. So you were a colonel this whole time? Zach asked, shaking his head in disbelief. All those extra push-ups Pierce made you do were nothing compared to what I've been through in special ops training. Darnell finished with a smile. Lisa leaned forward. Did you know Pierce would target you specifically? I suspected it might happen based on previous reports, Darnell said. But I needed to experience it firsthand to gather proper evidence. What happens now? Zach asked. For you two, training continues, Darnell said. You're both doing well. Keep it up. And Pierce? Lisa asked. That depends on his choice. I'll find out soon enough. Later that day, Darnell stood in Commander Clark's office again. This time, Pierce was there too, standing straight despite his injured leg. Sergeant Pierce has made his decision, Clark announced. Pierce cleared his throat. I've decided to accept the reassignment to Earth and the rehabilitation program, he said stiffly. It's better than I deserve. Darnell nodded. It won't be easy, Sergeant. You'll be working with people from all backgrounds facing your biases daily. But if you truly commit to the process, you can come out a better leader. I understand, Pierce replied. When do I leave? Tomorrow, Clark said. There's a transport scheduled for Earth at 800. After Pierce left, Clark turned to Darnell. You surprised me, Colonel. Most people wouldn't have given him that chance. Sometimes, the hardest path leads to the best outcome, Darnell replied. For both him and the Force. 6 months passed. Mars Colony 7 continued its training cycles. Lieutenant Reyes was promoted to captain and given full command of the training division. The colony expanded its facilities to accommodate more recruits as humanity pushed further into the solar system. In his office now, with Colonel D. Washington on the door, Darnell reviewed reports from the various training centers across the system. As the new head of training standards, he was responsible for ensuring consistency and fairness throughout the Interplanetary Defense Force's recruiting and training programs. His communication panel beeped. Colonel, you have an incoming message from Earth. It's Sergeant Pierce. Darnell accepted the call. Pierce's face appeared on the screen, looking healthier and somehow younger. The hard lines of anger that had marked his features now softened. Colonel Washington, Pierce began, his voice different than Darnell remembered. I wanted to report on my progress before my reassignment ends next week. Go ahead, Sergeant, Darnell said. The past 6 months have been difficult, Pierce admitted, but necessary. Working with recruits from all backgrounds, having to really see them as individuals rather than categories. He paused. It's changed me. Or maybe it's revealed the person I should have been all along. Darnell nodded. And your next assignment? That's why I'm calling, sir. Instead of returning to my previous position, I'd like to request assignment as a training advisor. I want to help implement the new inclusive training protocols you've developed. I think my experience could be valuable, both my failures and what I've learned from them. Darnell studied Pierce's face, looking for any sign of insincerity. He found none. That can be arranged, Sergeant. We're establishing a new training center here that will serve as a model for others in the system. We could use someone with your technical expertise. Relief washed over Pierce's face. Thank you, sir. I won't let you down. I know you won't, Darnell said. See you next week. After ending the call, Darnell walked to the observation deck. Through the reinforced glass dome, he could see the red Martian landscape stretching to the horizon. In the distance, construction crews were building the new training facility that would welcome recruits from all over the solar system, and even, rumor had it, a few representatives from the newly contacted Alpha Centauri civilization. Captain, Reyes joined him at the window. Was that Pierce? How's he doing? Better than I expected, Darnell admitted. He's coming back next week to help with the new training center. Reyes raised an eyebrow. Are you sure about that? People can change, Captain. Sometimes they just need the right push. They watched as a shuttle landed on the pad below, bringing a new group of recruits, men and women of all backgrounds ready to begin their training. You know, Reyes said thoughtfully, when you first arrived pretending to be a recruit, I never imagined things would turn out this way. Darnell smiled. That's the thing about people, they can always surprise you for better or worse. As they watched the new recruits file off the shuttle, standing tall and nervous just as Darnell had 6 months ago, he felt a sense of satisfaction. The interplanetary defense force was changing, becoming stronger through diversity rather than in spite of it. And somewhere in that process, a man like Pierce had found a better version of himself. That, Darnell thought, was a victory greater than any battlefield triumph. Not just changing systems, but changing hearts and minds. That was how humanity would succeed among the stars.